Tonight's story will help you fall asleep feeling more peaceful about money. You'll learn how Warren Buffett became one of the wealthiest people in the world, not by chasing more, but by choosing enough. He didn't grow his fortune with speed. He did it with patience, kindness, and calm habits anyone can learn. In the next 2 hours, you'll hear about real things Warren did that helped him build a life of stability, joy, and purpose. You'll see how his childhood shaped his mindset, how small routines became lasting wealth, and how simple decisions built a peaceful legacy worth billions. If you stay until the end, you'll understand the tools Warren used to stay steady during financial storms. These same tools can help you rest better at night, manage money without panic, and build your own calm version of success no matter where you start. This isn't a crash course in stocks or business. It's a soft journey through one man's life. A story told slowly with care so your nervous system can settle. A story about how money, when guided by values, can become a source of peace instead of pressure. Warren didn't grow up rich. He was born in 1930 during the Great Depression. Like many people today, his family felt uncertainty around money. But instead of letting fear take over, young Warren got curious. He wanted to understand how money worked, not to hoard it, but to feel safe. By age 7, he was reading books about earning income. At 11, he bought his first stock. By 14, he had enough savings to buy a farm. By 20, he had saved more than most people earn in a year. He didn't get there with luck. He did it with habits, small, consistent, thoughtful habits. In this video, we'll go chapter by chapter through those habits. We'll show you the small wins, the mistakes, the turning points, and the lessons behind them. And we'll explain how each one can gently apply to your life today if you feel behind or unsure where to begin. You'll learn what it means to invest in a way that feels human. You'll hear how Warren turned losses into wisdom. You'll see how he created strong foundations without loud risks. You'll learn why he still lives in the same modest house, eats the same meals, and never needed luxury to feel wealthy. You'll also understand why simplicity is more powerful than you think. Warren didn't master thousands of strategies. He focused on a few things he truly understood and ignored the rest. That's something anyone can do. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be consistent. This story will explain how Warren avoided stress in moments of crisis, like the 2008 market crash. While many panicked, he stayed calm. He trusted his process. He believed in long-term value, not short-term panic, and that belief helped him grow stronger even when the world felt uncertain. We'll also explore the deep emotional lessons behind his choices. Warren's life wasn't just about money, it was about meaning. He learned how to define success in his own quiet way. He avoided debt, he valued honesty, he built partnerships based on trust, and he gave most of his wealth away not to impress anyone, but because he believed it was the right thing to do. By listening to this story tonight, you'll learn how to think about money with more clarity and less fear. You'll learn how to shift from chasing to choosing, from overwhelm to focus, from worry to wisdom. You'll learn how to build your own version of enough, a version that fits your life, your values, and your pace. Whether you're just starting out or already on your way, Warren's story will remind you. It's okay to move slowly. It's okay to begin where you are. And it's always okay to try again. This story is meant to help you fall asleep feeling safe and inspired. Each chapter will end with a soft reminder or question to carry into your dreams. Each lesson will be gentle, never overwhelming, and each moment is built to calm, not stir your mind. You'll discover how Warren used a notebook to track every dollar long before apps existed. You'll see how he built businesses as a teen, learned from early losses, and focused on learning over showing off. You'll understand how he turned reading into his greatest tool, spending hours a day absorbing knowledge with quiet joy. You'll hear how mentors shaped his path, how one teacher changed his way of thinking forever, how love, loss, and reflection guided his big choices, how his emotions were part of his financial strategy, not distractions from it. And you'll notice something surprising. For someone so rich, Warren's life is full of simple things: books, coffee, bridge games, walks to the office, meals with family. He didn't chase noise. He created space for stillness. He made money work for his life, not the other way around. The best part? The habits that built Warren's life aren't out of reach. You don't need a finance degree to start. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to take one small step at a time, like saving $1, reading one page, asking one better question. That's how financial peace begins. This video won't give you flashy tricks. It will give you real peace, the kind that grows slowly, the kind that lasts. And by the time it ends, you'll feel more grounded in your own power to choose, to plan, to trust, to build a life that feels calm, safe, and truly yours. You'll walk through each phase of Warren's life, from his first business ideas to his early investments, from moments of public mistakes to moments of private wisdom. From years of quiet building to decades of thoughtful giving, each chapter is a mirror, a way to see your own journey with more kindness, more clarity, and more confidence that your path, like Warren's, can lead somewhere beautiful even if it starts small. You'll learn how to think like an investor even if you never buy a stock. You'll learn how to save like someone who trusts the future. You'll learn how to define wealth beyond numbers and how to build it in a way that helps you sleep well at night. So tonight, you're not just listening to a life story. You're learning how to change your own, softly and slowly. No pressure, just peace. No rush, just rhythm. You're being invited into a calmer way to grow. Stay with me, stay curious. Let this story be the one that shifts something deep, that reminds you money doesn't have to be war. It can be a quiet garden, one you tend with love, attention, and care. And as you rest, you might wonder something important. What did Warren learn in that quiet house in Omaha long before the world called him wise? That's where we begin. Before the billions, before the headlines, before anyone cared what he thought about the stock market, there was just a boy. A boy who rode his bike through the same quiet neighborhood in Omaha. A boy who liked routines, who liked numbers, and who liked the feeling of knowing what to expect. His name was Warren, and this was where his story started. The house he lived in was nothing fancy, just a modest home on a shaded street with squeaky floors and familiar walls. The kind of house where you could hear the hum of a refrigerator and the soft creak of someone walking down the hall. It was safe, predictable, and for Warren, it was enough. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the kind of kid who tried to get everyone's attention. In fact, he often sat alone, flipping through books, notebooks, and newspapers. He wasn't trying to show off. He was trying to understand, why did money move the way it did? Why did some people seem calm around it, while others always looked stressed? Warren's curiosity about money started young. When he was just 7 years old, he picked up a book from the Omaha Public Library. The title was 1,000 Ways to Make $1,000. It was old-fashioned and simple, filled with ideas like collecting bottle caps or selling soap. But to Warren, it felt like treasure. A book that made money seem like something you could learn, not fear. He didn't see money as a prize. He saw it as a puzzle. He wanted to figure out how to solve it, so he started experimenting, selling chewing gum door to door, bottling and selling Coca-Cola, offering weekly magazines on his route. Every dollar earned felt like a small answer to the big question. How does money really work? But money wasn't the only thing he was learning. He was also learning about effort, about how it feels to knock on a door and not be answered, about the quiet pride of saving up your own earnings, about the discipline it takes to keep going, even when it's early, cold, or hard. These were lessons he would carry forever. At 10, his father lost his job in Congress. Suddenly, the house didn't feel quite so stable. The security Warren had known became uncertain. But instead of panicking, he responded in a way that would become his lifelong pattern. He gathered information. He started keeping notebooks, tracking every penny earned, every cent spent. Numbers became his comfort. Those notebooks were more than just paper. They were control in a world that often felt unpredictable. They helped him turn fear into focus. This habit of writing things down, of facing financial facts, hadn't became a quiet strength. It was about staying present. When he turned 11, he made his first real investment. He bought 3 shares of stock in a company called City Service, not just for himself, but also for his sister Doris. He wanted to test what he had learned. Soon after, the stock dropped. He panicked and sold. A short time later, it soared in value. He had missed the gain, he felt the sting, but he didn't get bitter. He got curious. That one choice taught him a powerful truth. Patience is more valuable than prediction. If he had waited, he would have made more. That feeling, that deep awareness of emotional timing stayed with him, not just for stocks, but for everything. For spending, for saving, for life. It was his first lesson in the difference between reacting and responding. Around the same time, he was making real money from his newspaper route. Over $175 a month, an amount that, in today's money, would feel like a solid part-time job. But instead of spending it, he He tracked it, wrote it down, counted it carefully. He was building something, not just wealth, but a relationship with money that was based on clarity, not chaos. At 14, Warren filed his first income tax return. He claimed a deduction for wear and tear on his bike and his watch-2 tools he used to do his job. Most teens wouldn't even think to do that. But Warren saw systems, he saw patterns, and he knew that understanding the system gave him power. Not power over others, but power over fear. With $1,200 in savings, his own money, not a gift, he bought a 40-acre farm. He didn't run it himself. He hired someone else to manage it. He was still in school, but he understood the principle. If you place your money wisely, it can work while you rest. It was his first taste of passive income, quiet income that didn't demand your energy every single day. And when crop prices dipped, he didn't panic. He adjusted, recalculated, made new terms. He trusted the long-term process. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid. This approach, trusting systems instead of chasing trends, is something many people today forget, especially when headlines scream about markets or social media shows quick wins. At 16, his pinball machine business failed. Competitors offered better deals. Customers moved on. For a moment, it seemed like a loss, but Warren didn't sulk. He observed foot traffic. He sold the business for $1,200, the same amount he had used to buy that farm. That loop of learning showed him that failure wasn't a stop sign. It was a detour. All of these moments happened before Warren turned 20, but they were the roots of everything he would later build. Not because he had magic skills, but because he stayed close to his questions. He didn't let money confuse or scare him. He made it familiar. He watched it, studied it, asked what it needed to grow in peace. Many of us lie awake at night thinking about money, worrying about bills, wondering if we're doing enough. But Warren's story reminds us, peace doesn't come from big income or perfect plans. It comes from small daily attention, from being willing to face the truth gently, to name your numbers, to write them down. To learn a little more each day, you don't need to be a math genius. You don't need to be perfect. You just need a notebook, a calm moment, and the courage to begin where you are. That's how Warren began, in a quiet house, with simple tools and a mind that stayed open. His early life wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful. And if you listen closely, you might hear echoes of your own story. Maybe you had a paper route. Maybe you've kept receipts in a drawer. Maybe you've sold things, tracked expenses, or tried to understand what makes money feel safe. Those instincts are not random. They're the beginning of your own financial wisdom. And so, as the story unfolds tonight, we'll go deeper. We'll walk with young Warren as he turns from a curious boy into a thoughtful investor. We'll see how his small decisions stacked into a stable life. And we'll discover what it means to build wealth that doesn't just shin, it soothes. The next chapter reveals the quiet rhythm of morning deliveries, the feel of coins in a palm, and the way simple work shapes strong habits. Before Warren Buffett managed billions of dollars, he managed a small brown bag of chewing gum and a canvas sack of newspapers. His fingers, much smaller then, would fumble with coins and folded pages. As he made his way up porches in the early morning light, this was his first real business. Not in theory, not in dreams, but in footsteps and doorbells. He was up before most people, before the town fully woke up, before the cars started humming down the road, before ovens had warmed their first batch of toast. The streets of Omaha were quiet, and so was he. A boy in motion, delivering the day to people still wrapped in sleep. He didn't complain. He didn't need to be seen. He needed only the rhythm. He walked the same route every day, the same homes, the same steps, the same folding of the paper just right, the same metal sound when a coin dropped into his pocket. This repetition wasn't boring to Warren. It was comforting, predictable, and it taught him something deeper than money. It taught him the beauty of steady motion. Many of us chase big wins, the raise, the bonus, the lucky break. But Warren learned young that small, repeated effort adds up, that the money you earn quietly without drama-fun becomes the most powerful kind. Each dollar from that paper route was earned through consistency, through calm, through showing up. He made around $175 a month. That might not sound like much now, but it was a meaningful amount in those days, especially for a teenager. And he treated each dollar like it mattered. Not because he was greedy, but because he respected money. He knew that even pocket change, when guided with care, could grow into something solid. Warren didn't spend just to feel good. He recorded what came in, what went out, And what could stay? His notebook was a friend, a companion in a world where emotions often clouded decisions. When he looked at numbers, he didn't just see totals, he saw choices, patterns, possibilities. Today, we have apps that track spending, automatic notifications, color-coded charts, but the principle is still the same. When you face your numbers with kindness, they begin to feel less scary. When you record them, they become less mysterious. That's what Warren was doing, even then taking the mystery out of money. He didn't need someone to tell him it was important. He felt it. In his body, in the way he walked the route, in the weight of coins jingling in his pocket. Every small step was teaching him about discipline, about earning, about the slow, quiet connection between action and reward. And there was another lesson too, a deeper one, that money isn't always about what you can buy. Sometimes it's about what you can build. Warren wasn't buying toys or snacks. He was building savings, building habits, building a sense of self that said, I know what I'm doing. I know how to move with purpose. The paper route also taught him something else about people, about reliability, the importance of being on time even when it's cold, of doing what you say you'll do even when no one's watching. These are the kinds of things we forget sometimes, but they matter in work, in money, in life. There's something sacred about getting paid in coins and crumpled bills, something that feels more real than digital transfers or bank balances. It connects you to the physical world, to effort, to motion. And Warren felt that connection deeply. He also learned that money earned with your feet feels different than money given to you. It builds a quiet pride, not loud, not boastful, but grounded. A confidence that comes from knowing deep down that you can make something from nothing, that your time and your effort have value. We don't talk about that enough, how powerful it is to earn something on your own, not because it makes you better, but because it makes you trust yourself. That's what Warren was building every morning, not just his bank account, but his belief in his own rhythm. He didn't rush, he didn't try to leap ahead. He walked his route, step by step, day by day. He watched how the world moved, how people reacted, how the simple act of showing up could make things happen. He was learning patience without knowing it, and patience, he would later say, was the key to everything. He began saving for his next ideas. He didn't know exactly what they would be yet, but he trusted that something would come, and when it did, he'd be ready. That's another quiet lesson. Money is not just for today, it's also for the ideas that haven't arrived yet. It's the soil for your future seeds. In time, Warren would use his savings to try new ventures. He would buy machines, try services, invest in businesses. But all of that started with this one habit, waking up early, showing up, and delivering papers. That's where the story begins, not in a boardroom, but in boots on a sidewalk. It's easy to look at someone like Warren Buffett and think his life must be too different from ours. But the truth is, it started exactly where so many of us are now. With small income, with a little stress, with routines that feel quiet and invisible. But those routines, they shape everything. Maybe you're not delivering newspapers. Maybe you're working a job that feels unnoticed. Maybe your efforts feel too small to matter. But tonight, let Warren remind you, they matter more than you know, especially when they are repeated, especially when they are done with care. If you save even a few dollars from each paycheck, if you take time to track your spending with patience, if you build tiny habits that reflect your values, you are already walking the same path he walked. Not a fast one, not a loud one, but a strong one. He never believed in magic shortcuts. He believed in consistent behavior, in doing small things over and over until they added up to something extraordinary. His paper route didn't make him rich, but it made him ready. Ready to manage, ready to observe. Ready to observe, ready to trust the process instead of chasing the noise. So tonight, as you lie in bed thinking about your own income, your own dreams, your own quiet habits, know that you're not behind. You're on a route of your own, one that's just as meaningful as Warren's, one that can lead to peace, to clarity, to enough. Let this chapter be a reminder. Money does not need to come fast to be powerful. What matters is how it's handled, how it's respected, and how it reflects who you are. Your pocket change might not look like much, but if it's handled with care, it becomes more than money. It becomes a habit, a rhythm, a foundation. And from that foundation, anything can grow. So what did Warren do next with all those coins? He counted so carefully. He made a decision that most kids wouldn't have even imagined. And what happened after that taught him a lesson he'd never forget. Warren Buffett never needed a crowd to feel interested. He didn't need flashing screens or fast voices to feel excited. What captured him, even as a child, was something quieter, something most kids overlooked. He found joy in numbers, not for their size, but for their meaning. He wasn't showing off, he wasn't trying to be clever. He simply noticed how numbers had patterns, how money flowed when you paid attention to the details, how a small shift, spending a little less, saving a little more, could change everything over time. In school, while some students doodled in notebooks or stared out the window, Warren tracked figures. Not because he had to, but because it calmed him. There was something grounding about seeing numbers line up neatly on a page. It made the world feel less chaotic. He didn't see math as scary, he saw it as storytelling. When he looked at a chart or a balance sheet, he saw lives, he saw choices. He saw what someone valued, what they held back on, what they reached for. Money didn't lie. It always revealed the rhythm of a person's thoughts. At home, his notebooks filled with handwritten rows, sales from newspapers, profits from gum or Coke bottles, plans for what to do next. He wasn't just writing down numbers, he was listening to them, letting them whisper, "This is what's working. This is where you're headed." He learned early on that numbers didn't judge. They didn't say, "You're bad with money." They just showed what happened. And in showing it, they gave him choices. Do more of this, try less of that, maybe wait, maybe adjust, maybe try a new path. Many of us today fear numbers. We avoid bank apps. We delay checking balances. We carry the belief that numbers bring shame or pressure. But Warren's view was different. For him, numbers were just feedback, calm, neutral, helpful feedback. That's why he loved recording everything. Not to feel in control, but to stay aware. Awareness brought him comfort. It gave him time to make small shifts before they became big problems. It gave him the ability to plan, to reflect, to grow slowly without fear. His first investment taught him this on a deeper level. At just 11 years old, Warren used the money he had earned and saved to buy 3 shares of Citi's Service Preferred stock. He bought 3 more for his sister Doris. It felt big, serious, like a step toward the future. But soon after buying, the price fell. His stomach tightened. He felt nervous had he made a mistake, had he misunderstood, so he sold. It was a small gain, not a loss. But shortly after, the stock climbed high, much higher than he had sold it for. The missed opportunity hit him harder than a real loss. That single decision left a mark. It didn't scar him, it shaped him. He saw that his numbers could have told a better story if he had listened with more patience. He saw that reacting quickly was easy, but waiting quietly was powerful. He started to think differently, not just, "What is this worth now?" but "What could it become if I give it time?" The numbers weren't shouting, they were whispering, and he needed to sit still long enough to hear them clearly. He wouldn't make that same mistake again. Not because he was afraid, but because he now understood the rhythm of growth. He saw that value didn't always show up right away. Sometimes it needed space. Sometimes it looked like a dip before it looked like a win. That moment helped him see investing not as a gamble, but as a relationship. A long conversation between trust and time. He didn't want to rush it. He wanted to understand it. He wanted to get better at listening, especially when the numbers were quiet. So he started reading even more. Books about the market, articles about businesses, financial statements. He didn't just want to know what things cost. He wanted to know what they were truly worth. That idea, value beyond price, became one of the core truths of his life. He would later say, "Price is what you pay, value is what you get." It's simple, but it's everything. It means looking deeper, not just at the price tag, but at the quality underneath. Not just at the moment, but at the meaning across time. He applied this not only to stocks, but to people, to choices, to habits. He would ask, is this person reliable over time? Does this decision make sense over years, not just today? Does this habit give more than it takes? And when you live like that, money becomes clearer. It doesn't feel like a mystery. It feels like a mirror, reflecting back what matters, what's working, what needs care. This is what made Warren different. He didn't look for the loudest thing. He looked for the most consistent. He didn't chase trends. He watched patterns. And over time, those quiet choices made him wealthy in ways that numbers alone could never fully explain. He kept using notebooks long after he had apps and assistants. He still believed in writing things down, not to track perfection, but to stay connected to the truth, to stay grounded, to remember that money isn't about being brilliant, it's about being curious. And that's something we can all do, even today, even tonight. We can sit with our bank statements without judgment. We can open our budgeting apps without shame. We can look at the numbers and ask softly, what are you trying to tell me? Maybe it's that your spending has a pattern. Maybe it's that your income, while small, has potential. Maybe it's that your priorities have shifted and your money hasn't caught up yet. Maybe it's that you're trying, and that trying deserves kindness, not criticism. That's what Warren learned, sitting with his rows of figures. That numbers aren't scary when we invite them in gently. They don't shout, they whisper, and if we listen, they guide. So tonight, you don't need to be a financial expert. You don't need to know every term, you just need to stay curious. Keep your eyes open, keep your mind soft. Keep asking, what do my numbers say about the life I'm building? Because your numbers are not just dollars and cents. They're a map, a story, a reflection of your rhythms, your habits, your hopes. And just like Warren, you can learn to read that story with peace, with patience, with quiet confidence. What happened next in Warren's story would take that lesson even deeper. Because with all the knowledge he was gaining, he faced something new. A question that would follow him for the rest of his life. What is something truly worth and how can you tell before the world agrees? Warren Buffett was still a teenager when he made a decision that would echo across the rest of his life. He didn't talk about it much. There wasn't a big announcement, no proud speech, no crowd to applaud, just a quiet moment. Just a young boy in Omaha choosing to buy a few shares of stock again, this time with more understanding, more trust in time. He had already made his first investment at age 11. That one taught him about fear, about what happens when you act too soon, when you panic at a dip and forget what you came for. He remembered the disappointment, but he also remembered the lesson. And now, a few years older, he was ready to try again. This time, he didn't rush. He studied, he read about companies, he followed the numbers in the newspaper every day, not to feel smart, but to stay close to the patterns. He wanted to see what made businesses strong, what made them last, what made them worth holding on to. While other kids talked about dances or dates, Warren was thinking about market prices and long-term gains. He wasn't trying to be different, it just made sense to him. Investing felt like gardening. You plant something small, you water it with patience, you wait, and if you choose well, it grows. He learned that it didn't matter if other people understood him. He didn't need everyone to agree. He just needed to believe in the companies he chose. If he did the homework, if he trusted the value, then he could ignore the noise. He could stay steady while others rushed. At that age, many teens feel pressure to fit in, to buy what's cool, to look impressive. But Warren had a different sense of value. He wasn't drawn to what sparkled, he was drawn to what lasted. And he learned to separate what looked exciting from what actually worked. He started buying stocks against small positions in companies he believed had real potential. Not just because their prices were low, but because their businesses were solid. They made things people needed. They had leaders he respected. They had the quiet strength of good systems. He didn't expect them to explode overnight. He expected them to grow slowly, predictably. That's what made him different. He didn't want fast. He wanted firm, not headlines, just healthy roots. This kind of thinking gave him a new kind of confidence, a soft, steady trust in his own process, not arrogance, just calm. He knew he wouldn't always be right, but he knew how to learn, and that mattered more. He started to see investing as something bigger than profit. It was a reflection of character, of how well you could manage your emotions, of how deeply you understood yourself. You didn't need to be loud, you needed to be clear. He also started saving more of his income. From paper routes, from small ventures, from teaching himself how to flip opportunities, he reinvested it into more stocks, more lessons, more questions. Every dollar became a teacher. Every choice, a chapter in his story. And even though the amounts were small, the habits were strong. He treated $10 the way some people treat $10,000, with focus, with respect, because he knew money multiplies only when you care for it. And the earlier you start, the more time it has to quietly grow. By the time he finished high school, he had saved close to $10,000 worth, over $130,000 today. And he didn't do it through some secret trick. He did it through small, steady, boring steps. The kind that most people overlook because they want something faster. But Warren never chased fast. He chased clarity, and clarity takes time. He started reading about Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, someone who believed that a business should be bought the way you buy a house. Carefully, with questions, with patience, not based on rumors, but based on reality. Graham became his invisible mentor. Warren copied his ideas, studied his strategies, and realized that investing wasn't about being bravet, was about being rational when others were emotional. That truth stayed with him forever. Eventually, Warren applied to college. He didn't get into his first choice. Harvard turned him down. It hurt, but it didn't stop him. He found his way to Columbia, where Benjamin Graham was teaching, and suddenly, the door that closed led to the one he was meant to walk through. That moment taught him something profound, that rejection isn't the end. Sometimes, it's a redirection. And when you follow your interest with patience, the right teacher will appear, the right door will open. He studied under Graham, learned even more about spotting value, about finding companies that were underappreciated but strong, about waiting for the right price, about saying no to almost everything until the yes felt clear and calm. This wasn't gambling. This was discipline. It was emotional control. It was the art of knowing what to ignore. Warren's investment style began to take shape. He started seeing himself not as a stock picker, but as a business buyer, someone who looked past the ticker symbol into the heart of what a company actually did, how it made money, how it trained customers, how it handled change. He would later say, "I'm a better investor because I'm a businessman, and a better businessman because I'm an investor." That soft loop between roles helped him see money from both sides. As his understanding deepened, so did his calm. He no longer felt shaken by market drops. He knew they were part of the rhythm, like tides, like seasons. You don't panic when leaves fall. You prepare. You trust the pattern. And that's what investing became for him: a rhythm, a practice, a mirror of his inner state. When he felt clear, he chose clearly. When he felt rushed, he waited. And in that waiting, he found strength. It's easy to forget that Warren started young, that he made mistakes early, that he got scared and acted too fast. But what made him different wasn't that he was perfect. It's that he kept learning, he kept observing, he kept refining. And that's something we can all do, even if we're starting late, even if we've made money mistakes, even if we feel lost. The path is always open, and every small step forward counts. You don't have to invest in stocks to learn from Warren. You can invest in your habits, in your time, in your attention. Every decision you make about how to use your energy, that's an investment too. The teenage version of Warren wasn't special because of how much money he had. He was special because of how he thought. And that thinking was built, one page, one choice, one soft breath at a time. Tonight, let that truth settle in, that your future doesn't need to be rushed. It needs to be shaped, slowly, gently. They're about knowing yourself. And the next chapter of Warren's life, it brings him face to face with a mentor who would change everything. Warren Buffett didn't find his mentor on a stage. He didn't meet him at a party or through a lucky introduction. He found him the way quiet learners often do, between the lines of a book, tucked inside a paragraph written in the calm voice of someone who understood value better than almost anyone else alive. His name was Benjamin Graham. And to Warren, reading his work felt like discovering a language he had always known but never heard spoken out loud. Graham wasn't flashy. He didn't promise fast riches. He spoke about something more lasting, more grounded. He talked about value. Warren first came across Graham through his writing. The book was called The Intelligent Investor. Inside, he found ideas that made sense right away. Not because they were simple, but because they were steady. They didn't rely on predictions. They didn't depend on luck. They were built on behavior. Graham taught that the market is like a person. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's afraid. Sometimes it gets excited and overpays. Sometimes it panics and sells too low. But if you can stay calm when it isn't tiff, you can listen when others shout. You'll always find value where others only see noise. Warren felt like he had found a friend, not someone who gave him answers, but someone who asked better questions. And those questions started to shape how he looked at everything. Not just stocks, but choices. Not just companies, but people. He realized he had been looking for this kind of clarity for years. All the paper routes, all the saved coins, all the notebooks full of numbers, they had been pointing him to this mindset. One that didn't react, one that observed, one that waited until things made sense. Soon, Warren decided to apply to Columbia Business School because that's where Graham taught. He wanted to learn not just from the book, but from the man behind it. He didn't know what would happen. but he trusted the path. Getting accepted changed his life. Sitting in Graham's class felt like finding home. The ideas were familiar, but deeper now. There was structure, language, strategy, and more importantly, there was emotional steadiness. Graham didn't just teach investing, he taught temperament. Warren watched how Graham handled uncertainty, how he separated feelings from facts, how he looked at numbers, yes, but also at people. He saw investing as part math, part psychology, and part patience. It was a practice of staying centered while others tilted. Graham believed in buying businesses at less than they were worth, not because they were trendy, but because their true value had been overlooked. This idea became the heart of Warren's own strategy. He called it value investing, and it felt like a compass he could trust for life. One of Graham's key ideas was what he called the margin of safety. It meant buying something at a price low enough that even if things went a little wrong, you'd still be protected. It wasn't about getting rich quickly. It was about protecting yourself slowly. That margin of safety wasn't just for money. Warren started to see it everywhere, in relationships, in time, in habits, leaving space, allowing breathing room, preparing gently instead of acting with urgency. It made sense to him, and he carried it with him. After graduating, Warren asked Graham for a job, but Graham said no. Not because he didn't like Warren, but because he wanted him to find his own way. At first, it hurt, but it pushed Warren home to Omaha, where he started building his own practice. And from that quiet corner of the country, he began applying every lesson he had learned. He didn't try to copy Graham exactly. He adapted the wisdom to fit his own temperament. He took what worked and shaped it into something new. But Graham remained his North Star, his grounding influence, his reminder that investing wasn't a race, it was a reflection, a mirror of who you were becoming and what you believed. Warren never stopped talking about his mentor. Even decades later, he would call The Intelligent Investor the best book ever written on investing. He would quote Graham's phrases. He would share stories from the classroom because he knew that wisdom lasts longer when it's shared. And the wisdom he learned wasn't about being the smartest person in the room. It was about being the calmest, the most patient, the most prepared to wait. That preparation, Warren believed, was everything. He didn't try to be early, he tried to be ready, to sit with information until it felt clear. To move when it was time, not when it was loud. You might think of mentors as people with all the answers. But Warren's greatest teacher didn't give him shortcuts. He gave him a lens, a way to see money, not as pressure, but as a practice, a way to choose, not just react. You don't need to study at Columbia to find that kind of influence. You can find it in a book, in a sentence, in the quiet pages of a story that feels like it's speaking just to you. Mentors aren't always people we meet. Sometimes they're people who help us meet ourselves. Warren's life shifted after learning from Graham. His investing became sharper, his thinking became slower but clearer. He started turning down more opportunities than he accepted. He learned to say no, not from fear, from focus. That kind of clarity is rare in a world that rushes. But Warren made it his home. A home where he made decisions with stillness. A home where he waited for the right business, the right people, the right time. Tonight, you don't need to remember formulas. You don't need to memorize terms. You just need to remember this. Wisdom is often quiet, and when you slow down enough to hear it, it changes everything. You may already have a mentor in your life, a voice that helps you pause before choosing, a book you return to, a lesson you can't forget. These are the things that shape us, softly, repeatedly, without pressure. Warren Buffett didn't become wealthy just from knowing numbers. He became wealthy from knowing when to wait and what to listen for, from learning not to rush what needs to grow, from trusting that the right path doesn't always start with noise, it starts with depth. And when you live like that, money becomes something more than survival. It becomes a quiet reflection of your values, a place where your choices align with your peace, a space where your future begins with one careful step. Warren kept Graham's teachings close, not because they were complicated, but because they were true. And tonight, as you rest, you can keep them close to. Let your margin of safety be your calm. Let your values show over time. Let your questions stay open long enough for good answers to find you. Because the next step Warren took would change everything again. He wouldn't just be a student anymore. He'd become a teacher. Warren Buffett didn't look rich when he started his career. He didn't wear expensive suits or drive a flashy car. He didn't build a big office in a fancy building. He looked like a regular man living in a quiet neighborhood, sipping a Coke and reading a newspaper. But beneath that simple surface was a kind of wealth few people understood. He believed that wealth wasn't about what others could see. It was about what you could hold inside: peace, freedom, choices. And the way he built it wasn't loud or fast. It was careful, thoughtful, built on routines that most people overlooked because they seemed too boring to be powerful. After returning to Omaha, Warren started his own investment partnerships. Nothing big at first, just friends and family who trusted his strange, calm way of thinking. He didn't promise wild returns. He didn't shout predictions. He simply said, "I'll treat your money like it's my own, and I'll only invest when I understand what I'm buying." That sentence, simple as it sounds, became a rule he would never break. He didn't buy companies he didn't understand, not because he wasn't smart enough to figure them out, but because he believed that confusion was a warning sign. If it's too complex, it's probably too risky. He called it his circle of competence. It meant knowing what you know, staying there, not trying to impress people by reaching too far, just focusing on what you understand deeply and doing it well, over and over. The companies he chose weren't trendy, they weren't exciting. They were strong, steady, and often overlooked, like a textile business in New England called Berkshire Hathaway. Most people thought it was a dying company, but Warren saw something in it, a slow strength, a shell with potential. He began buying shares in Berkshire, not because it was perfect, but because it had value. He believed that with time and better decisions, it could become something more, and little by little, it did. Not because of a miracle, because of steady attention. Over the years, Berkshire Hathaway became the holding company for many of Warren's investments. It wasn't flashy, it didn't make headlines in the beginning, but it became the foundation for something massive, a quiet empire built from understanding. He didn't just buy businesses, he studied them. He talked to their leaders, he visited their factories. He looked at how they treated employees, how they handled change, how they made money when things were slow, not just when they were booming. He asked questions most people didn't. Not how fast can this grow, but how long can this last? Not how do we compete, but how do we stay useful? He wasn't hunting treasure, he was planting trees. He also lived simply, still in Omaha, still in the same house he bought in 1958. Not because he couldn't afford more, but because he didn't need more. He liked his routines, he liked his quiet, and he liked knowing that wealth wasn't about showing off, it was about breathing easier. His daily habits reflected this mindset. He read for hours every day, not to seem smart, but to stay informed. He drank cherry Coke, ate breakfast from McDonald's, watched sports, laughed with friends. His life didn't look like a billionaire's, but that's what made it peaceful. And while other investors bragged about big moves, Warren stayed silent. While others tried to time the market, he trusted the tide. He believed in buying good businesses and holding them, not for weeks, not for months, for years, sometimes forever. He often said his favorite holding period was forever. Not because he was stubborn, but because he understood that time, when used well, multiplies quietly. That the biggest returns come not from jumping around, but from staying still in the right place. This idea is powerful in all areas of life, not just money. It means choosing friendships that grow deeper, routines that ground you, work that feels steady instead of urgent. Warren didn't just invest money that way, he invested his life that way. And slowly, the world began to notice. Not because he tried to be famous, but because results, when paired with patience, are hard to ignore. But even as he became one of the wealthiest people on earth, his personality didn't change. He still lived with kindness, still wrote letters to his shareholders in plain English, still made jokes, still walked to the rhythm of someone who wasn't trying to rush. He said no to most opportunities. Not because he was negative, but because he knew that saying no meant leaving space for the right yes. He believed that most mistakes came not from missing good chances, but from chasing bad ones. And that is a kind of rich that's hard to see. The rich that doesn't need approval, the rich that doesn't panic, the rich that doesn't run out of breath trying to keep up. You might be listening tonight and thinking, but I'm not rich, I'm barely getting by. That's okay, because the point of Warren's story isn't that you need millions to feel safe. The point is that peace starts when you live by principles, not pressure. When you track what matters, when you say no to things that don't serve you, when you protect your energy And when you give your money a calm home, you are building wealth. Even if it's slow, especially if it's slow. Warren often said, the best investment you can make is in yourself. And he meant it. Learn more, think longer, stay curious, and don't let other people's urgency decide your pace. He didn't just buy stocks, he bought peace, he bought time, he bought freedom to make careful decisions. And he earned that, not by being flashy but by being firm in who he was. Tonight, maybe you can do the same. Not in a big leap, just in one small change. One quiet promise to treat your money with a little more care, to track it, to save when you can, to think before you spend, to pause before you follow someone else's urgency. That's what Warren did, not just once, but always. And over time, those tiny decisions built a life of quiet, powerful wealth. But there was still something else he was learning, something deeper than stocks, deeper than savings. He was learning what happens when you stop needing more and start understanding what enough really means. There's a moment in many people's lives when they realize that chasing more doesn't always feel good. It can feel like running on a treadmill fast, loud, and never-ending. Warren Buffett learned early on that this chase wasn't for him. He didn't want speed, he wanted stillness. He didn't want more, he wanted enough. Enough is a hard word to define. It doesn't show up on bank statements, it doesn't have a scoreboard. But Warren found that it lives inside you. It shows up in your breathing, in your ability to sleep at night, in how little you worry when life gets quiet, and in the way you respond when others around you panic. He'd already seen wealth change people. He watched how some grew louder with success, while others grew quieter. How some needed to prove they had money, while others just lived peacefully with it. Warren knew which one he wanted to be. He once said, if you buy things you don't need, you may soon have to sell things you do. It wasn't a warning. It was a gentle reminder that enough isn't about denying joy. It's about choosing joy with intention. It's about knowing the difference between satisfaction and distraction. So he designed his life around that idea. He lived in the same modest house for decades. He didn't upgrade his car every year. He wore the same types of clothes, and he ate meals that made him happy, not meals that made him look important. McDonald's breakfasts, cherry Coke, simple things, familiar things. He didn't think simplicity made him less successful. He believed it made him free, free to focus on what mattered, free to say no without guilt, free to walk away from things that glittered but didn't glow. That's the heart of enough. It's not about limiting your dreams. It's about protecting your peace. And Warren didn't find this lesson in a moment of crisis. He found it by paying attention, by noticing how he felt when he spent without thinking, by reflecting on what actually brought him comfort, not just stimulation. He noticed that the joy of a new thing faded fast, but the joy of being steady, of knowing his values lasted. He didn't feel anxious checking his bank account. He didn't dread monthly bills because his life was built on a pace that matched his needs. This doesn't mean he never wanted more, but he wanted more of the right things. More time to read, more time to think, more space to invest wisely, more room to grow slowly, not more noise, not more clutter. He also believed that enough wasn't just a number, it was a mindset. He once told a story about two men at a party. One was a billionaire, the other was a writer. The writer was asked if it bothered him that the billionaire made more money in one day than he would ever make in his lifetime. The writer smiled and said, "I have something he'll never have enough." That story stuck with Warren because it reminded him that enough is not a finish line. It's a choice, a boundary, a soft, protective wall you build around your time, your focus, and your energy. And just like he found his investing strength in patience, he found his life strength in simplicity. He made fewer decisions because his life didn't demand constant adjustments. He wasn't always trying to upgrade, update, or outperform. He was simply trying to stay aligned. You can hear this in how he speaks. Calm, measured, unhurried. Like someone who knows that big results come from small, consistent choices, not sudden leaps. This sense of enough also shaped how he thought about giving. He knew he wouldn't spend most of his money, so he planned to give it away, but not recklessly, with care, with focus, with a desire to help without control. He promised to donate the majority of his wealth to causes that mattered, and he encouraged other billionaires to do the same, not for applause, but because he believed that holding on to more than you need while others struggle doesn't build peace, it builds distance. That kind of thinking doesn't just apply to billionaires. It applies to all of us. Because no matter your income, you can still practice enough. You can still ask, what do I truly need? What brings me peace? What can I let go of? Sometimes we think having more will finally make us feel secure, but often what we really need is less pressure, less comparison, less chasing, and more rest, more clarity, more gratitude. Warren learned this not from luxury, but from listening, from looking at his own habits, from watching others lose their way. He saw that the people who felt the safest weren't always the richest. They were the ones who lived within their values. That's a form of wealth too, a kind you can feel every morning when you wake up and realize you're not afraid, you're not behind, you're not pretending, you're just quietly okay. You're living inside the shape of your enough, and that shape doesn't need to look like anyone else's. Maybe for you, it's a paid-off debt, a savings cushion, a meal you made yourself, a schedule with time for your thoughts. That's all valid. That's all valuable. When Warren made investment choices, he didn't aim for the highest possible return. He aimed for the best return that aligned with his principles. He said no to things that were risky, even if they promised more, because peace was more valuable than potential, and that applies to our daily money habits too. Choosing a cheaper option that brings calm, saying no to a subscription you barely use, saving for something meaningful instead of spending for a moment. These are the acts of someone who knows what enough feels like. You don't need a fortune to feel that way. You need a filter. And Warren's filter was simple. Does this help me live the way I want to live? If the answer was no, he passed. If the answer was yes, he stayed. And over time, that filter helped him build not just wealth, but wisdom. Tonight, as you lie in bed, ask yourself gently, what does enough look like for you? Not as a dollar amount, but as a feeling, as a rhythm, as a shape that fits your real life. Maybe it's already closer than you think. And maybe, just maybe, you don't need to chase more to feel more whole. In Warren's case, understanding enough helped him grow without losing himself. But the next lesson would test something deeper, because once you know what's enough for you, how do you stay steady when the world keeps offering more? It's easy to say no when you have little. When you're just starting out, limits are clear. But what happens when the limits disappear, when the money flows freely, when the offers get bigger, when people call you brilliant, and doors you didn't knock on begin to swing open? That's when the real test begins. Warren Buffett had already built something rare: a calm portfolio, a peaceful life, a growing reputation. But with success came attention, and with attention came pressure. Opportunities he had never dreamed of. Partnerships, ideas, risks dressed as rewards. The kind of things most people would say yes to without a second thought. But Warren didn't say yes to everything. In fact, he said no more often than ever, not out of fear, but out of principle. He knew that too much often shows up wearing a smile. It looks exciting, it sounds smart, but it rarely feels peaceful when you sit with it long enough. He once said, the difference between successful people and really successful people is that really successful people say no to almost everything. That wasn't about arrogance, it was about protection. Protecting time, protecting values, protecting the quiet that allowed him to think clearly. Too much can cloud your clarity. It can fill your calendar with noise. It can turn your focus into fragments. And Warren knew that his biggest edge wasn't speed or scale, it was stillness. The ability to think long, wide, and deep without rushing. Even when people begged him to expand faster, to chase trends, to go big on ideas that felt new and shiny, he stayed with what he understood. Insurance companies, consumer products, railroads, businesses that made sense to him, that had clear paths, that didn't depend on luck or hype. He trusted what was boring, not because he feared change, but because he valued control. And control didn't come from gambling. It came from structure, from repeatable systems, from decisions made with clarity, not adrenaline. Warren saw too many people fall into the trap of just a little more. One more investment, one more shortcut, one more edge. But he knew that edge often cuts both ways. And when you build your life chasing sharper and sharper risks, one wrong step can cost everything. So instead, he made his path dull on purpose, predictable, quiet, sometimes even mocked for being too cautious. But he didn't mind. He wasn't building for headlines. He was building for decades. And that meant having the courage to ignore what looked like opportunity but smelled like distraction. He stayed out of the dot-com bubble. When tech stocks soared in the late 90s, Warren didn't jump in. People called him outdated. said he was missing out, but he kept his money where his understanding lived. And when the bubble burst, he was safe not because he predicted it, but because he protected his principles. That's the power of knowing the difference between can and should. Warren could have made riskier moves, could have chased fads, could have tried to time every high and low, but he knew that wealth built in panic rarely stays. So he stuck with his slow method. Buy businesses he understood, at prices that made sense, with leaders he respected. And hold them, not forever out of stubbornness, but until the reasons for owning them changed. His restraint wasn't about limitation, it was about freedom. The freedom to keep his head clear, to sleep without anxiety, to never feel like he had to outguess the market to survive. And that kind of freedom is worth more than any jackpot. It's tempting to think more money means fewer problems. But Warren knew that unchecked more often brings hidden costs, more stress, more complexity, more noise. He didn't want a life he had to manage every second. He wanted a life that managed itself. So he turned down deals, turned down flashy ideas, turned down anything that felt like a stretch. Not because he lacked ambition, but because he knew exactly where his peace came from. This lesson matters even more today, in a world of constant notifications, flash sales, new coins, quick returns. The temptation of too much is everywhere. But Warren's story reminds us that the strongest choice is often a soft no. No to pressure, no to rushing, no to what you don't understand. He built an empire by passing on 99 out of every 100 ideas that came his way. And when he did say yes, it was never rushed. It was always researched, always thought through, always anchored to values. That kind of patience looks boring on the outside, but inside, it's powerful, because it lets you build something that doesn't collapse at the first storm. Tonight, maybe you can pause and ask, where am I tempted to say yes? Just because it feels urgent, what could you gently decline, not forever, but for now so your peace stays intact? Saying no isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's knowing that too much might look like success, but often feels like stress. Warren Buffett's success wasn't shaped by how much he gained. It was shaped by how much he protected. His energy, his attention, his standards. And you can do that too. You can decide what's enough. You can choose not to be pulled in every direction. You can create a life that doesn't need more, just deeper meaning. He didn't become the world's most famous investor by being the loudest. He became it by staying close to his center. So the next time you feel pulled by a shiny offer, a tempting deal, or a sudden rush of excitement, pause. Ask what Warren would ask. Do I understand this? Does it fit my values? Am I making this choice out of clarity or out of fear of missing out? That soft pause can change your whole path. And Warren's next chapter shows what happens when you build a life on those kinds of pauses. Because after years of patient growth, he faced something he had always quietly prepared for. A moment when the world fell apart. The world doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it shouts, crashes, panics, headlines screaming numbers in red, markets free-falling, people pacing in their kitchens, staring at screens, wondering what went wrong. That's what happened in 2008. And Warren Buffett, already in his late 70s, found himself at the center of it all. The financial system was shaking, banks were folding, confidence was crumbling. People were scared not just about investments, but about jobs, homes, and futures. And when fear takes over, logic tends to disappear. That's when calm becomes rare and powerful. Warren didn't panic. He didn't rush to sell. He didn't scream into a microphone on a news show. He sat quietly, read more, listened more, and then, slowly, he started making decisions. Not out of fear, out of clarity. He believed what he always had. Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. And right now, the world was very, very afraid. That meant it was time to be brave, not wildly brave, just thoughtfully brave. So he began investing. Not into every company, but into a few he believed would survive, even thrive, if given enough time. He saw opportunity in the wreckage not because he liked risk, but because he trusted resilience. He made big moves, $5 billion into Goldman Sachs, a major stake in General Electric. Investments that seemed shocking at the time, but Warren saw past the headlines. He looked for value where others saw only doom. And while most were trying to escape the fire, Warren walked into it with a fireproof mindset built over decades, one that said, markets recover, people rebuild, patterns return, and the best time to act is when no one else can think straight. This wasn't luck. It was preparation. All those years of saying no, of studying slow companies, of staying simple when the world got noisy, it all came together in this moment. Because when everything felt urgent, Warren already had a plan. He had cash ready. He had clarity about what he believed in. He had the calm to make decisions that weren't just for the next quarter, but for the next quarter century. And here's the most important part. He didn't expect everything to work perfectly. He knew some choices might hurt in the short term. He expected bumps, but he had trained his mind to sit through discomfort. This is what emotional wealth looks like. It's not just about being rich, it's about being rooted. Warren didn't flinch because he wasn't chasing anything. He was protecting something, his principles, and those principles reminded him. When things fall apart, that's when truth becomes visible. That's when good businesses prove their strength. That's when disciplined thinkers rise, not because they're fearless, but because they're steady. His actions during the crash became a signal, a lighthouse in the storm. People watched him, took notes. Some even followed his investments, hoping to feel a little less lost. And Warren didn't brag. He didn't gloat. He simply wrote letters to his shareholders, reminding them of what they already knew. The stock market is designed to transfer money from the active to the patient. That word again, patient, it was his secret all along. And not just during the 2008 crash, but during every dip, every correction, every panic. Warren didn't react to the news. He responded to reality. He stayed with his strategy because his strategy was built to last through storms. That's something we all need. A personal money plan that holds steady when things get loud. A plan that says, I know who I am, I know what I value, and I'm not here to win the news cycle, I'm here to win the long game. You don't need billions to apply this. You just need patience, a budget that isn't tight but flexible, a savings plan that isn't perfect but consistent, a mindset that doesn't chase but reflects. That's the real protection in any crash, not prediction, preparation. And Warren was prepared because he believed in margin, in buffers, in breathing room. He didn't spend everything he had. He didn't invest more than he could afford to lose. He didn't tie his happiness to market swings. So when things got bad, he stayed upright. Not untouched, but unshaken. That's the kind of peace we all deserve. And that's why his story matters tonight, because it reminds us that financial safety doesn't come from guessing right. It comes from building right, from habits, from values, from saying no when things are easy, so you can say yes when things are hard. Warren made it through the crash, not by reacting better, but by preparing better. And he did it all from the same house in Omaha. Reading, thinking, acting with care. His calm became contagious. People started believing again. And when the dust settled, Warren's investments had paid off not just in profit, but in trust. He had shown that wealth isn't about control, it's about conviction. Knowing who you are, even when everything else shakes. That's what got him through 2008. That's what will get you through your storms, too. You don't need to move fast. You just need to stay still long enough to hear your own voice. The voice that says, I've made mistakes before, I might make more, but I will keep learning, I will stay steady, and I will not be defined by a dip, because every market recovers, every fear fades, and every wise habit makes you stronger next time. Warren didn't fear the crash. He used it to build, but even after all he gained, he still believed something most people never do. That money is important, but reputation, that's priceless. Some people chase numbers, others chase titles. But Warren Buffett spent most of his life protecting something quieter, something you can't deposit or frame, something that follows you into every room, every deal, every decision, your name. Warren believed that your name is your truest currency. It holds the trust people give you, the way they describe you when you're not around, the comfort they feel or don't feel when you say, I promise. To him, reputation wasn't an afterthought. It was the investment. He once said, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently. And he meant it. Every choice, every yes, every no it, either built the name or broke it. That's why he avoided shortcuts. Even when they were legal, even when no one would notice, because he didn't measure decisions by whether he could get away with them. He measured them by whether he could sleep afterward. He wanted a name you could sleep on, not just respect, but rest, The kind of reputation that made people breathe easier when you entered the room, because they knew you wouldn't lie, you wouldn't trick, you wouldn't hide behind fine print. That principle shaped every part of his business. When he bought companies, he didn't just look at numbers, he looked at people. Did they run their business honestly? Were they proud of how they treated others? Could he trust them without checking every line? If the answer was no, he passed, even if the business looked good on paper, even if the price was right, because to Warren, partnering with someone who cut corners wasn't just risky, it was exhausting, and nothing is worth your peace. He kept his promises, even when they weren't convenient. If he gave his word, he followed through, and he expected the same from those around him. That's why people stayed with him for decades. They didn't just believe in his returns, they believed in his character. This mindset made Berkshire Hathaway unique. It wasn't just a company, it was a community of trust. CEOs stayed after selling their businesses, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, because they knew Warren wouldn't destroy what they built. He didn't micromanage, he let good people do their jobs. But he made sure they knew cutting ethical corners would never be worth a temporary gain. One bad move could undo years of good, so people acted carefully, not out of fear, out of respect, because when someone believes in you enough to trust you fully, you want to live up to that belief. That's the kind of leadership Warren practiced. Not loud, not controlling, just honest, present, steady. He didn't obsess over being liked, he focused on being dependable, and over time, that dependability turned into something rare. Admiration without obligation. People didn't trust Warren because of his money. They trusted him because of his word. And in a world full of broken promises, that became priceless. But reputation doesn't just affect business. It affects how you feel when you're alone. Warren could relax not because everything always went right, but because he didn't carry the weight of hidden regrets. He didn't owe anyone a fake story. He didn't have to remember lies. He just lived plainly. That kind of living is powerful. It lets you build without fear. It lets you make mistakes honestly. It lets you change your mind gently. And it lets you forgive yourself faster because you weren't trying to be perfect, just real. Warren knew that people remember how you make them feel. And when your name feels safe, your presence becomes a gift. You don't need $1 billion to build that kind of name. You just need consistency. You need to follow through. You need to admit when you're wrong. You need to treat others not how they deserve to be treated, but how you'd want your name to be carried by them. And when you do that enough times, the world begins to trust you. Slowly, quietly, like a tree growing in a garden nobody sees, until one day it shades everyone around it. That's the reputation Warren built. And it gave him more than profit. It gave him peace. Tonight, maybe that's a goal worth holding. Not success that impresses strangers, but character that comforts friends. Not perfection, but presence. Not applause, but alignment. When your name and your actions match, your life feels lighter. Decisions become simpler. Apologies become easier. Trust becomes your default. And that trust opens doors money never could. Warren didn't need to pitch himself in rooms. People already knew what he stood for, because he had been standing there for years. That's how you become wealthy in a way no market crash can undo. By becoming someone others can believe in even when times are hard. Especially when times are hard. He knew money would come and go, but values, those stay. And the next chapter of Warren's life proved that. Because after decades of protecting his name, he had to decide what kind of legacy he wanted it to leave behind. Most people spend their lives trying to gather. They collect money, titles, things, praise. They believe that more will feel like enough someday. But Warren Buffett spent his life learning a very different lesson that true wealth isn't measured by what you keep. It's revealed by what you're willing to give. By the early 2000s, Warren had become one of the richest men in the world. His net worth had grown beyond anything he had imagined as a boy delivering newspapers in Omaha. He had more money than he could ever personally spend, even if he tried. But that didn't excite him. It made him thoughtful. He asked a simple question, not, how much can I pass on? But, how much do I really need to keep? And the answer surprised even him. Very little. He didn't want to build a dynasty of wealth for his children. He loved them deeply, but he believed in the power of earning your own path. In learning, failing, growing, in not letting money soften your sense of purpose. So he made a decision. He would give most of it away, not in small amounts. Not later, but now, quietly. Warren didn't want a building named after him. He didn't want a golden statue. He He wanted to help people who were already doing great work. So he turned to a friend he trusted deeply, Melinda Gates. Through the Gates Foundation, he would donate the majority of his fortune, billions of dollars, over time, carefully structured, thoughtfully planned, focused on health, education, poverty relief, not because it made headlines, but because it made sense. He believed those dollars could do more good now than sitting untouched for decades. He called it returning society's investment, because in his mind, his wealth wasn't something he created alone. It was built on the stability of a country with strong systems, smart people, and shared opportunity. And now it was time to give back, not out of guilt, out of gratitude. He also encouraged other billionaires to do the same, to sign what became known as the Giving Pledge, a public promise to give away the majority of their wealth during their lifetimes or in their wills. And many followed, not all, but enough to start something bigger than money. A shift in how wealth could be viewed not as a trophy, but as a tool. Warren knew he didn't need hundreds of homes or private islands to feel rich. He already felt rich every morning he woke up curious, every moment he spent reading in silence, every time he sat down to write a letter that helped someone understand their finances more clearly. That was his version of luxury: peace, purpose, clarity. Giving away billions didn't make him feel smaller. It made him feel lighter. It made him feel closer to the boy he used to be, the one who dreamed big, but never dreamed of gold, just freedom. Freedom to learn, freedom to give, freedom to be trusted. And as he aged, he felt more urgency not to hold, but to release. Because legacies, he believed, weren't built in vaults. They were built in choices. He kept a portion of his wealth, yes, enough to live the life he enjoyed, but the rest, he saw it as a river, not a dam, something that could flow forward and nourish others, something that could create ripples long after he was gone. He often said, if you're in the luckiest 1% of humanity, you owe it to the rest of humanity to think about the other 99%. And he didn't just say it, he lived it. His life became a blueprint for those who didn't just want to be rich, but wanted to be kind with their riches. Warren didn't believe that giving should be flashy. He believed it should be faithful, consistent, aligned with your values, and the more he gave, the clearer he became. That money is only meaningful when it's in motion, helping, healing, building, not gathering dust in an account, but building dreams in quiet corners of the world. Tonight, you don't need to be a billionaire to reflect on this. You just need to ask, what am I holding that I could share? It could be time, it could be knowledge, it could be kindness. Or, if you have more than you need it could be money, too. Wealth doesn't ask us to give everything. It asks us to give meaningfully, to know what matters most, and then put it to work. Warren didn't start as a giver. He grew into one, because over time, he saw that giving didn't take away from his wealth. It completed it. It turned dollars into stories, numbers into names, balance sheets into bridges. And in doing so, it gave his money a second life, one that would outlast him. Warren's story reminds us. Generosity is not a personality trait, it's a practice, one you can start in small ways and grow into big ones. You don't need headlines, you just need heart, the kind that whispers, I have more than enough, and now I can help. Because giving, when done with care, doesn't make you less wealthy. It makes your wealth more human, more durable, more unforgettable. And as Warren moved into his later years, he knew he had given something else away too. Not just his fortune, but his formula. A quiet life, a patient plan, a generous spirit, the kind of life that lets you sleep well and helps others do the same. Warren Buffett could have lived anywhere. He could have built a mansion in Beverly Hills, bought a penthouse in Manhattan, or settled on a private island surrounded by ocean views. But he didn't. He chose Omaha, a small, unassuming city in the middle of America, and he never left. For some, that choice didn't make sense. How could one of the richest people on earth still live in a house he bought in 1958? Why stay in a city with no financial hub, no glamorous social scene, no luxury car dealerships on every corner? Warren didn't see Omaha as a limitation. He saw it as clarity. He called it his anchor. While others chased faster lives in louder cities, Warren stayed in a place that helped him think. A place where the pressure was low and the distractions were fewer. A place where he could hear his own thoughts. Omaha gave him something Wall Street couldn't: distance. That distance helped him avoid the noise, the trends, the panic, the overconfidence that swirled through trading floors and financial news channels. It gave him time, space, stillness. He once said, I like the quiet. It helps me focus. People in Omaha don't ask what stock I bought today. They ask if I've been to the Dairy Queen lately. That kind of simplicity wasn't small-minded. It was wise. It reminded him of who he was before the billions, before the spotlight, before the Forbes lists. A boy who loved numbers, who delivered newspapers, who walked through neighborhoods filled with people he knew by name. That boy never disappeared. He just grew older in the same streets that shaped his values. In Omaha, Warren wasn't a celebrity. He was a neighbor. He drove himself to the office every morning, stopped at McDonald's for breakfast ordering based on how the market was doing, waved to familiar faces. Read the newspaper, sat at the same desk. Omaha kept him grounded. It reminded him that success didn't have to be visible to be real, that comfort could come from rhythm, not renovation, that meaning could grow in the most ordinary places if you stayed long enough to let it. And that's something we often forget. In a world that pushes us to upgrade, relocate, chase the next big thing, Warren chose to stay. Because for him, the location didn't shape the life. The values did, and his values lived in Omaha, in the quiet streets, in the modest office, in the familiar coffee mugs and creaky floors. They lived in the simple conversations, the steady pace, the sense that nothing was missing if the world expected more. His home wasn't just a house, it was a decision to not get swept away, to not measure success by square footage, to not confuse movement with progress. And his company, Berkshire Hathaway, followed that spirit. It didn't move to Wall Street, it stayed in Omaha. Its annual meetings became legendary not for their glitz, but for their warmth. Tens of thousands traveled from all over the world to attend what became known as Woodstock for capitalists. But the tone wasn't loud, it was lighthearted. Two old friends, Warren and Charlie, sitting on a stage, answering questions, making jokes, sharing wisdom that felt more like bedtime stories than financial lectures. All from a small arena in a small town that never asked them to be anyone else. That's the power of staying put. You stop chasing mirrors, you start growing roots. And those roots become strong enough to hold you steady then when everything else moves. Warren didn't need to leave Omaha to feel important. He already felt complete. And that sense of completeness gave him more than comfort, it gave him focus. He wasn't racing traffic. He wasn't trapped in constant networking events. He was reading, thinking, writing, doing deep work in a city that let him disappear into the quiet. That quiet wasn't empty. It was full of ideas, of patience, of unshaken routines. And it helped him make better decisions, not because he was smarter, but because he was less distracted. We often think we need to go far, to go big. But Warren shows us that staying small can hold more power than we think. It gives us permission to listen deeper, to build longer, to love slower, and to stop needing our surroundings to prove our worth. His story reminds us that home is not about hype. It's about alignment. It's about waking up in a place that helps you be more of yourself, not less. And that place might look simple to others, but to you, it's everything. It's safety. It's memory. It's where your best ideas bloom. Tonight, as you lie in your own space, think softly. What makes you feel like yourself? Is it a place, a routine, a relationship? You don't have to go far to grow deeply. Sometimes the path forward is the path you've already walked, just with a little more attention. Just like Warren in Omaha, no mansion, no skyline view, just a chair, a book, and a calm morning sun. That's where his legacy lived. Not in what he bought, but in what he kept. His values, his pace, his peace. And that peace gave him the freedom to create his final gift. Not in dollars, but in lessons. Because when the world asked how he became so rich, he gave an answer no one expected. People expect complex answers. They think wealth must be built on hidden tricks, fast moves, or insider knowledge. But Warren Buffett never taught that. He built one of the greatest fortunes in history using ideas simple enough for a child to understand. The magic wasn't in secrets. It was in sticking with the basics, longer than most people could wait. He believed in things like saving money, living below your means, buying what you understand, being patient, avoiding debt. These weren't flashy. They weren't new, but they worked. And Warren trusted them not because they were exciting, but because they were timeless. One of his favorite habits was reading. He read every day, hours and hours, not to impress people, but to understand the world better. He once said, "The more you learn, the the more you earn. But it wasn't about money first, it was about thinking clearly, because clear thinking leads to better choices. With money and with life, he also believed in the power of compounding, not just in investments, but in everything: relationships, habits, decisions. He knew that small actions done over and over grow into something bigger than most people imagine, but only if you give them time. Most people don't. They switch paths too often. They chase what's new. They expect big results fast. But Warren built his life slowly. He wasn't trying to win the race. He was trying to finish it, calmly, wisely, with his values intact. That's why he didn't try to time the market. He bought companies he believed in and then held on. Sometimes for decades. While others panicked, he stayed still. While others sold in fear, he stayed focused on the future. It wasn't that he never made mistakes, he did. But his system allowed room for mistakes. It wasn't built on perfection. It was built on resilience. That's the quiet strength of simplicity. It bends but doesn't break. It adjusts but doesn't collapse. And it frees you from chasing what you don't need. Warren liked simple rules too. Spend less than you earn. Don't buy what you don't understand. Invest for the long term. Avoid unnecessary debt. Trust yourself more than the crowd. These rules don't change with the seasons. They don't care who's trending. They just work. Slowly, gently, almost invisibly. And that's why so many people ignore them. Because they're not loud enough, not dramatic enough, not fast enough. But Warren knew. Slow builds strong. That's why he didn't rush to be a billionaire. He just stayed consistent. Through recessions, through market highs, through public praise and private doubts, he kept doing what worked. Again and again. And because of that, his fortune wasn't the result of one big win. It was the result of thousands of small wins, stacked patiently like bricks in a wall that would never fall. Even his office stayed simple. No fancy art, no endless screens, just papers, books, peace. That's what gave him clarity. And clarity gave him power. Because when you know what you believe, you don't need noise. You don't need to impress anyone. You just stay the course. And Warren's course was always about simplicity, even in how he explained things. When he taught investing, he used metaphors. He compared buying stocks to buying slices of a business. He told people to treat investing like owning a farm, where the value came not from daily price changes, but from what the land produced over time. These images helped people understand, not just intellectually, but emotionally, because money doesn't just live in numbers. It lives in feelings. And Warren knew that managing money means managing your emotions. Fear, greed, impatience, comparison. These are the real dangers, not taxes or fees or inflation. And that's why his simplicity was so powerful. It gave people a way to stay calm when the world was not. He gave them tools to return to. When confusion hit, when trends changed, when voices got loud, he gave them reminders. That simple doesn't mean small. It means clear. It means lasting. It means peaceful. And peaceful money habits create peaceful lives. Tonight, maybe that's the lesson to hold close. Not that you need to master every chart or track every investment, but that you can begin with simple, kind habits, saving something each month, spending with purpose, learning slowly, saying no gently, holding when others panic, and letting your money grow like a tree, not like a fire. Warren didn't become rich because he chased big wins. He became rich because he avoided big losses, because he stayed simple and stayed the course. His story isn't one of genius, it's one of consistency. And that's good news, because consistency is something we can all choose. Even if our income is small, even if we're just starting, even if we've made mistakes, especially if we've made mistakes. Because a simple plan still works, no matter where you begin. And in the next chapter of Warren's story, we'll see how that simple life became something far greater than just a story of wealth. It became a way to live, a model, a map, a quiet invitation. Warren Buffett never set out to become famous. He didn't try to be a guru, a thought leader, or a public figure. He just wanted to understand money, make smart choices, and live peacefully. But somewhere along the way, something unexpected happened. His calm, quiet way of living began to teach millions. Not through big speeches, not through flashy videos, but through the way he moved through life. Simple, thoughtful, steady. He became a mentor, not by trying to lead, but by showing what it looked like to stay true to your values, even when no one was watching. His annual letters to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders became required reading for investors around the world. People waited for them each year, not because they were packed with predictions, but because they were packed with wisdom, written in plain language, with jokes, stories, and metaphors. They felt less like financial reports and more like fireside chats. In a world full of jargon, Warren chose clarity. In a culture obsessed with chasing more, he chose enough. And in doing so, he became something most teachers can only hope to be. People trusted Warren not just because he was successful, but because he was consistent, because his advice matched his actions, because he didn't change his message with the markets, he didn't change his tone with the times, he just told the truth. Softly, even when he spoke publicly, his words were slow, measured, sometimes funny, sometimes serious, but always grounded in thoughtfulness. He didn't talk over people's heads, he talked to their hearts. And that's why millions listened. Young investors watched his interviews. College students studied his methods. Parents passed his quotes on to their kids. His life became a long, living example of how to build not just wealth, but character. And here's the beautiful part. Warren never pretended to be perfect. He talked openly about his mistakes. He admitted when he misunderstood something, he shared lessons from his losses. And that made people trust him even more. Because nothing feels safer than someone who's honest about getting it wrong and still keeps going. That honesty became his gift. It told people, you don't need to be a genius, you just need to be patient and kind and clear and willing to learn. He believed in self-education, in reading and asking questions, in staying curious longer than others stay certain. He didn't just model smart investing, he modeled a quiet kind of humility that's harder to find than any stock tip. And as people followed his journey, they began to notice something else. Warren didn't talk much about numbers. He talked about behavior, about temperament, about trust. He knew that most financial success isn't about finding the perfect investment. It's about avoiding the ones that don't align with who you are. He told people not to try to outsmart the market, but to outlast it. To focus less on predicting and more on preparing. To accept that you'll miss out on some things, but you'll sleep better knowing your choices fit your values. This was his mentorship, not a course, not a brand, just a quiet stream of wisdom flowing through decades of calm decisions. And people drank from it gratefully, not because he promised riches, but because he reminded them that peaceful money is possible, that you can succeed without rushing, that you can grow without shouting, that you can build a future without betraying your present. Warren didn't sell his way of life, he lived it, and that's what made it contagious. People didn't want to copy his portfolio, they wanted to copy his calm, because calm is rare, and when someone shows you how to hold on to it, you never forget them. That's what Warren became for so many, not just an investor, but a compass, a reminder that your life can be both simple and strong, that your plan doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be yours. Tonight, maybe that's the mentorship we all need. Not someone yelling from the stage, but someone walking beside us, reminding us gently, you don't need to be fast, you don't need to be flashy, you just need to be faithful to what matters most. That's what Warren did, and through that, he mentored not with noise, but with presence. He showed what's possible when you don't chase attention, but earn respect when you don't chase growth, but choose alignment when you don't try to become more than you are, but become more deeply who you already are. And in the final chapter of his story, Warren shows us the greatest return of all, not in dollars, but in dignity, not in fame, but in freedom. Warren Buffett's net worth has been published in magazines, tracked in real time by news tickers, and discussed endlessly online. But the number never seemed to matter much to him. He didn't check it every day. He didn't celebrate each milestone, because deep down, Warren knew something most people never learn, that the greatest kinds of wealth can't be counted. You can't measure peace of mind on a spreadsheet. You can't graph a good reputation. You can't assign a dollar value to living a life that feels deeply your own. And those were the kinds of riches Warren spent his life collecting. He once said, basically, when you get to my age, you'll really measure your success in life by how many of the people you want to have love you actually do. That was the true bottom line. Not stock prices, not annual returns, but love, respect, trust. That quiet truth followed him everywhere. In the way his children talked about him, in the way his business partners stayed by his side for decades, in the way complete strangers felt comforted, just listening to his slow, thoughtful voice. Because Warren didn't just teach about money, he taught about meaning, and meaning lasts longer. It lingers in the choices we make when no one's watching, in the kindness we give without needing recognition, in the wisdom we pass down, not through lectures, but through how we live. Warren's real wealth was in the life he designed, piece by piece, with patience and care. A modest home filled with comfort, a quiet routine filled with thought, a business built not just on returns, but on relationships, and a name that, by the end of his life, stood for more than profit. It stood for something rare. It stood for trust. In his later years, Warren spent more time reflecting. He wrote letters. He answered questions. He reminded people not to try to be like him, but to learn from what he got right and from what he got wrong. He wanted people to build lives that felt light, not cluttered with pressure, not weighed down by comparison, but grounded in what really matters. He reminded us that money is just a tool. It can be used to build or to break, to heal or to hide, but it is never the goal. Peace is, integrity is, freedom is. That's the wealth you can't measure. The wealth that lets you sleep at night. The wealth that lets you say no when everyone else says yes. The wealth that lets you look in the mirror and feel proud, not for what you own, but for how you live. Warren never claimed to have all the answers, but he asked the right questions. How much is enough? What's worth my time? Who do I want to become? And how do I live a life that matches that vision, gently, faithfully, and with joy? He believed that true success isn't something you win. It's something you live every day in small ways. The morning coffee shared with someone you love, the moment you help someone without expecting anything back, the quiet evening where you feel safe because your life finally feels like yours. Tonight, that's the lesson that lasts. You don't need millions to build wealth like Warren's. You just need values that guide you, habits that calm you, and a heart that stays open even when things are hard. Because emotional wealth is always within reach. It grows when you listen to what really matters, when you slow down enough to notice your own life, when you give more than you take, and when you realize that the best things you'll ever own can't be bought. Warren's story reminds us that money can be part of a beautiful life, but it's not the meaning of life. The meaning is in connection, in clarity, in quiet mornings and earned trust, in being the kind of person others can depend on, and in learning over and over again that small steps, taken patiently, lead to the strongest foundations. So tonight, as this story settles in your heart, know that your own version of peace is possible. That calm wealth isn't a myth, it's a practice, a path. One soft decision at a time. You don't need to be Warren Buffett to live wisely. You just need to remember what he lived by. Stay curious, stay kind, stay consistent, and above all, stay simple. Because true wealth was never about having it all. It was about needing less and loving more. You've now walked the quiet life of Warren Buffett. From a curious boy with a paper route to a man who gave billions away and kept a humble heart. His story wasn't about shortcuts. It was about stillness, trust, and doing the next right thing. So if you're still awake, just know this: you are enough. You don't have to figure it all out tonight. You've made space for clarity, you've made time to rest, and tomorrow you'll wake with a little more peace, a little more direction, and a heart that's just a bit lighter. Thank you for spending your evening here. If you'd like to drift into more calming finance stories, we'll be here tomorrow night. Sleep softly, dream wisely, and carry your quiet wealth with care.